Thank you. Thanks all for your efficiency in grabbing lunch and coming back in. I wanted to keep us moving and to introduce our luncheon speaker. We're very fortunate to have him with us. Ambassador Arun Singh joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1979, which those of you who keep track of the Indian Foreign Service know was about the last year when it was impossible to be accepted to the Indian Foreign Service. So it was quite a source of distinction that he was in that class. And he went first to Moscow and has Russian in his background, and has served a couple of interesting tours there. I think typical of the Indian Foreign Service, he has quite a lot of breadth in his background. As he came up as a young diplomat, he served, as I say, twice in Russia, once in Japan. He worked in Delhi on East Asian affairs, on multilateral affairs. He was in New York in his country's United Nations delegation for a while. And as we sort of bring the clock forward to the 10 years that we've been wrestling with, the last 10 years, Ambassador Singh was back in Delhi working at South Block on first multilateral affairs and then Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iranian affairs. In 2005, he became his country's ambassador to Israel and served there for 3 years. Really one of the most interesting stories in Israel's global diplomacy is the relationship it's built with India over the last 20 years. Not well told, but fascinating. Welcome a question from the floor, even though it's really not on our agenda about it. And then he came to Washington after Tel Aviv as the deputy chief of mission, where he has served very actively over the last couple of years. His presence here today is a signal of his style. He's always available. He's constantly engaging. He's gotten to know Washington very well. He's made a lot of friends here. And we're very pleased to welcome him as our luncheon speaker. Please welcome Ambassador Arun Singh.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And 2 days from now, I'm going to follow you to New York, largely to hear you speak there at an event. You referred to 1979, the year I joined the Foreign Service. And 1979 was the year that the Soviet troops had moved into Afghanistan. And among the first meetings I had covered in the Ministry of External Affairs was a meeting which was a follow-up, fallout of that event. So it's a problem that all of us have been dealing with since then. I would like to structure my remarks today by first outlining India's perspective for the future of South Asia, the efforts that successive governments of India have made to realize this vision, and the challenges that we have faced in this task. When we look at the map of South Asia, it is perhaps hard to imagine that only about 60 years ago, many of the countries represented on the map today were largely a single political and economic unit. South Asia had been historically and culturally a contiguous region with deep social, cultural, and linguistic linkages. The process of independence from British rule in 1947 changed it all and led to political fragmentation and severing of economic links. An illustration of this phenomenon is provided by the trade figures within the region. At the time of independence of India, intra-regional trade was about 19% of the total trade that the region had with the rest of the world. In the case of bilateral trade between India and Pakistan, for example, in 1947, it was almost 60% of their trade with the rest of the world. This figure progressively declined over years and reached a low level of about 2% in the late 1960s. In the last few years, it has started to pick up, but at about 6%, it is still a far cry from what could be achieved. This also stands in marked contrast to other regions of the world. For example, in East Asia and the Pacific, about 52% of the total trade is intra-regional. In Latin America and the Caribbean, this figure is at about 17%. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the figure is 11%. South Asia, in comparison, is perhaps the least economically integrated region. And yet, there are a number of studies that indicate that greater economic integration in the region would be beneficial for all the countries of the region and would help them realize their development objective of reducing poverty through sustained and equitable economic growth. Certainly, the clock cannot be turned back or the political realities that exist today wished away, but we can try and revive, for common good, our traditional linkages and flow of goods, people, and ideas that characterize our shared space as South Asians. India has therefore pushed for a vision of South Asia that seeks to restore these historical economic linkages. It is a vision that is informed by our own experience after independence. Domestically, since independence, we have tried to pursue a policy of inclusive and equitable socio-economic growth that empowers all our citizens and affords them opportunities to realize their full potential in a democratic manner. President Obama, speaking at the Indian Parliament yesterday, said that the idea of India is its embrace of all colors, castes, and creed. The policies that we seek to pursue in our neighborhood and beyond are informed, therefore, by our domestic experience and our ethos, and we seek to promote creation of economic interlinkages for mutual benefit in a framework of tolerance, pluralism, multiculturalism, and peaceful coexistence. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh elaborated on our vision of South Asia at the SAARC summit in Dhaka. He said that although South Asia is divided by political boundaries, the region forms a single geographical and economic unit. It occupies a shared cultural space, a shared cultural legacy. He said that while we could not erase political boundaries or redraw them, we could certainly work together to make them progressively irrelevant. And of course, everyone knows the experience that Europe and the European Union has had in similar processes. He called on the South Asian leaders to take the first decision to reconnect the countries of the subcontinent on the one hand, and then reconnect the subcontinent to the larger Asian neighborhood. India's vision of South Asia is thus of a region that calls for a framework of common economic prosperity and embeds within this the issues related to peace, security, and development. Our expectation is that the very dynamic of establishing cross-border economic linkages, drawing upon the complementarities that exist among different parts of our region, would eventually lead to collective prosperity and enduring peace. The objective should be to build interdependencies as we all have a vested interest in each other's prosperity and stability. We believe that democracy would provide a more enduring and broad-based foundation for an edifice of peace and cooperation in our subcontinent. We are willing to work with all our neighbors to build on this so that South Asia can emerge as a community of flourishing democracies. One would imagine that given our shared history, our common cultural heritage and other ties, such regional integration would have been easier. A common apprehension that is voiced is that given India's size in the subcontinent, such integration would not be in the interest of the smaller neighbors. This is, however, not supported by facts. For over 20 years now, the Indian economy has been growing at broadly an average rate of about 6%, and in the last several years, the growth has been about 9%. We took a hit with the global economic crisis, but we are resuming to grow at nearly 9% now. This has not only resulted in improved living standards in India and growing prosperity, but our growing market also provides an opportunity for our neighbors to benefit, at least for those who have chosen to do so. For example, since the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, which came into force in March 2000, the total trade between the two countries has increased from about $670 million in 2001 to $3.2 billion in 2007, approximately a five-fold increase. Sri Lanka's exports to India during this period grew by 838% compared to their total export growth of 47%. About 86% of Sri Lanka's exports to the region go to India. There has been a matching increase in investments in Sri Lanka from India. Similarly, we have formed a mutually beneficial partnership with Bhutan by harnessing its tremendous hydropower potential. The power produced is purchased by India, leading to revenue generation in Bhutan. Today, India is also the leading investor in Bhutan and in Nepal. This practice has shown that India's large size and economy can work in a mutually advantageous manner for both our neighbors and for us. As our economy grows and our capabilities increase, we have also indicated a readiness to provide asymmetrical benefits to our neighbors to ensure that they have a preferential access to our markets, such as granting duty-free access to a large range of products originating from Bangladesh. India has also given zero duty access to least developed countries within SAARC from 1st January 2008, as had been announced at the SAARC summit in Delhi in 2007, and we implemented it a year ahead of the target date. We have also unilaterally reduced our negative list with respect to the least developed countries. Our message has always been that our neighbors need to see India as an opportunity and that we are ready to work with them for mutual prosperity and benefit. Another critical factor in enabling a reconnected South Asia is to restore the links that allowed people, goods and services to travel across the region and to create new such links. Some progress has been achieved on this front in recent years. There is now greater connectivity between Bangladesh, Nepal and India. India has also embarked upon an ambitious program to upgrade its infrastructure along its borders with Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar and Bangladesh. These projects involve upgradation of highways, extension of railway lines into neighboring countries, and we hope that these would all lead to better transport connectivity. There are 15 transit routes from Kolkata and Haldia to Nepal for third country trade. There is also a direct road transit route from Nepal to Bangladesh through India for bilateral and third country trade. A direct railway transit route is under discussion. With Bangladesh, we have more than 20 operational land customs stations, 4 points for movement of goods by train, and 8 routes for movement through river systems. Dhaka is connected with Kolkata by road and train service, and to Agartala in Tripura in the northeastern part of India by bus service. Apart from improving connectivity to allow transportation of goods, we are also taking steps to put in enabling mechanisms that would allow freer movement of peoples in the region by liberalizing the visa regime. In addition to these bilateral processes, we have also attempted to reinvigorate SAARC as an important vehicle for achievement of a peaceful, prosperous and stable South Asian region. We have done this by conveying our willingness to assume greater responsibility, and SAARC has seen activation of several regional initiatives such as the SAARC Food Bank, the SAARC Development Fund, the South Asian University, the SAARC Regional Standards Organization. SAARC has also recommended several measures to improve the physical connectivity within the region, including road corridors from SAARC member states through Pakistan to Afghanistan, running a demonstration train from Pakistan to Bangladesh through India and Nepal, and setting up an expert group to finalize motor vehicle and railway agreements. These offer great potential for the future. We have also participated in development assistance and capacity building exercises in our neighboring countries, given that some of them have also been facing difficult political and socio-economic transitions. For example, in Nepal, which is dealing with a transition towards democracy, we have provided assistance including vehicles, communication equipment, electronic voting machines, and other logistical support for holding elections. In Sri Lanka, where a long period of violent internal strife came to an end last year, we have provided humanitarian aid and are supporting the reconstruction and rehabilitation process, especially in the northern part, which was the most affected region. Earlier, in the aftermath of the tsunami, we had provided disaster relief. Now I come to Afghanistan, which has been a focus of some of your discussions earlier this morning. There we have provided developmental aid and assistance at considerable human cost to ourselves to help build Afghan capacities and institutions. This is part of our contribution to establish an effective governance system that is able to deliver goods and services required by the Afghan people who have suffered years of unremitting violence. We believe that democracy and development are the key instruments to ensure that Afghanistan becomes a source of regional stability and does not slide back into extremism. The present level of our assistance is more than $1.3 billion, which has made India the sixth largest bilateral donor in terms of figures. And we are not a traditional donor, yet we have stepped forward to provide this assistance. And most assessments have shown, including by Afghan government sources, including by sources in the US, that Indian assistance has been extremely effective, has reached out to the people, and there has been a very positive feedback from that. Our projects cover a wide range of sectors, including hydroelectricity, power transmission lines, road construction, agriculture and industry, education and health, and which have been identified by the Afghan government as priority areas for reconstruction and development. We are today providing midday meals to 2 million Afghan school children out of a total Afghan school-going population of about 6 million. This is as part of the Back to School program. We built a 300-kilometer road segment from Zarang Dilaram to provide connectivity linking to the Garland Road in Afghanistan to enhance Afghanistan's access to the outside world. We also built a 300-kilometer power transmission line through very difficult terrain and high mountain ranges, which has brought a final link of power to Kabul from Uzbekistan, and we believe that as a result, Kabul now has 24-hour electricity supply. All these projects we have undertaken in partnership with the Afghan government, and these are aligned with the Afghanistan National Development Strategy and with a focus on local ownership of assets. We also have a preferential trade agreement with Afghanistan since 2003 to promote freer movement of goods through reduction of tariffs between the two countries. We do not see Afghanistan as a platform for regional competition, but as a future hub of regional stability, trade and transit connecting Central and South Asia. We welcomed Afghanistan when it joined SAARC as its 8th member in 2007 and firmly believe that greater regional cooperation and economic integration of the Afghan economy with South and Central Asia would create favorable conditions for lasting peace and security. In this context, it would be useful if Afghanistan were to be fully linked with the larger consumer market of the South Asian subcontinent. We believe that all stakeholders in the region and beyond must work for that objective. On its part, India will continue to support the Afghan people in developing their capacities to assume greater responsibility for their development and governance. Today, we provide scholarships to about 1,000 Afghans to come to India every year for training, for capacity building, and 300 in the agriculture sector. We would also be more than willing to work with Pakistan to our mutual advantage to benefit from the economic opportunities being generated in the region. According to some estimates, the bilateral trade with Pakistan increased in the last few years to reach a level of about $2 billion. Add to this the indirect trade that takes place, and some estimates say that the total then comes to about $4 billion. The potential is for much more. For example, we imported cement from Pakistan in 2008 as a special measure when there was a shortage in India, and exported cotton to it when there was a need in Pakistan. It is not just in trade and economic relations that we can be partners. We have also sought to help in situation of need, as in the case of the recent floods in Pakistan. We offered $25 million in assistance and were ready to do much more as a neighbor. We could have, for instance, provided much needed relief material and supplies across the border. Pakistan asked us to channel our assistance through the United Nations, which we did. During the visit of President Obama to India, speaking at his press conference in Delhi, the Prime Minister of India said that he believed that a strong, peaceful, moderate Pakistan is in the interest of India, in the interest of South Asia and the world as a whole. That India was committed to engage with Pakistan and to resolving all outstanding issues, but that we cannot continue a dialogue if the terror machine from Pakistan is as active as ever before. And here I'm quoting from what the Prime Minister said yesterday. In fact, terrorism today is the most difficult challenge that faces not just the region, but the entire global community. And as many analysts have pointed out, the epicenter lies in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region. This has also impacted negatively upon the process of regional economic engagement, connectivity, and people-to-people contact. Experience also shows that terrorism finds a convenient breeding ground in absence of normal functioning state institutions. India therefore supports the objective in Afghanistan to enable the emergence of a moderate, democratic Afghanistan where all the ethnic communities and people can pursue their normal lives and elimination of safe havens for terrorist groups. It would be a long haul in Afghanistan, and we would all have to be prepared for that. Success requires that there must be sustained action against Taliban, Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups who continue to find refuge and sustenance across the Afghan border with Pakistan. We believe that any segmentation or attempts to differentiate groups based on political expediency would not be in the interest of a longer-term objective. History and experience has shown that these groups, their agendas often mutate, they tend to support each other, and such segmentation has never led to the desired results. We also believe that any reconciliation or reintegration effort should include only those who abjure violence, renounce terrorism, and pledge to abide by the values of democracy and pluralism and the Afghan constitution. One could conclude, therefore, that ultimately what is required is for the countries of the region to look at our common goals of peace and security in an integrated manner, taking into account our people's welfare and not just thinking in terms of military issues or a zero-sum game. This can be done if we are able to promote complementarities, link our economies on a trajectory of inclusive growth, and in the process remove artificial barriers and some self-defeating policies. Freer trade and investment flows across the region and easing of restrictions on people-to-people links and communication are a necessary building block to realizing this vision. The recent developments in restoring and developing linkages with Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal and Bangladesh, bilaterally and through SAARC, give us reason for hope and optimism. The power of positive example may also help others who have so far been reluctant to move forward on this basis. In India, we remain committed to pursuing both bilateral and regional efforts to build a stable, peaceful, and prosperous South Asia. Thank you very much.
To stay on time, Ambassador Singh's graciously agreed to take just a couple of questions, but we'll hold it to that. So if you have one, stick your hand up and we'll find you with a microphone. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Can you say a few words about India's future plans for participation in counterterrorism efforts, especially regional efforts?
Well, in the regional context, in SARC, there is a framework for cooperation in counterterrorism. And with several of the countries in the region, we have been working very actively in dealing with these issues, intelligence sharing, sharing of information, assessments. So we would certainly, terrorism is a challenge and a threat to India. And we would certainly be willing to work as effectively as any of the other countries are ready to deal with this challenge. And with the United States also, we have, since I'm here, let me refer to that, we have a very strong mechanism and dialogue on dealing with terrorism issues. And among the things that have been announced during the visit of President Obama is an expanded framework of cooperation between the Department of Homeland Security and our Ministry of Home Affairs.
One more? Yes, woman there in the center.
I think if we're speaking about Pakistan-Indian relations and talking about Afghanistan, it's also important to talk about Kashmir as kind of a bone of contention between those two countries. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit to efforts to maybe work towards resolving the Kashmir issue, both with Pakistan or maybe even also including groups like the All-Parties Hurriyat Conference in Kashmir itself.
What you have to understand is, now I have to speak from the Indian perspective, in a sense that, and the Indian perspective is very clear that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. And whatever may be internal issues within India are resolved by the government of India in dialogue and other discussions with the people there. And from time to time, the Indian government, the Indian state has faced challenges in different parts of the country. We had a challenge in the 80s in Punjab. We've had a challenge in the Northeast in certain times. And the whole effort of the government has been to deal with that, eventually to resolve it through dialogue and incorporating all those who have been in opposition into the democratic framework of India within the broad constitutional structure of India. And it has worked very effectively in most parts of India. So that is the framework within which the government addresses the issue as it relates to the internal situation. Now, there is an external aspect of the problem in Jammu and Kashmir, on which, as the Prime Minister said even yesterday, that he has no hesitation in discussing this issue with Pakistan, but he cannot have a discussion so long as terrorism is being used against India. And so that was the position.
I think we better call it a day there so that we can keep moving. And thank you again, Ambassador, for sharing this such a thoughtful set of remarks and your time with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you're in charge of the next